Okay, folks, buckle up because we're diving headfirst into some pretty intense philosophical waters today with excerpts from Fear and Trembling by Søren Kierkegaard.
Definitely not your typical beach read.
Right, not exactly light and breezy.
He
But don't worry, with the help of our expert here, we're going to extract those mind-blowing gems that make Kierkegaard such a fascinating, if challenging, thinker.
really does push you to think differently about faith, especially when you look at his take on the whole story of Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah, we're not just talking about a retelling of a biblical tale here. We're talking about the father of existentialism, using this story to dissect the very nature of faith that leap beyond logic to show us what it truly meant to believe.
And what's so captivating about Kierkegaard is how he just dives right into the unsettling parts of this story.
He doesn't sugarcoat it.
No, not at all. He confronts us with this question. How can faith sometimes demand actions that seem to go against everything we believe about morality?
Like, it's easy to say, ethically speaking, asking a father to sacrifice his son is wrong. But what if faith operates on a completely different level?
That's what he wants us to explore.
He calls this the teleological suspension of the ethical, where faith becomes this higher calling, almost transcending those earthly moral codes.
It's this idea that faith isn't always neat and tidy. It can be paradoxical, messy, and sometimes even demand things that seem wrong in the conventional sense.
It's like he's throwing down a gauntlet, daring us to think about how we reconcile our deeply held beliefs with actions that seem to defy all logic and morality.
Absolutely. And to illustrate this, he contrasts Abraham with the classic tragic hero. Think Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter Iphigenia.
Right, both are making huge sacrifices, but the motivations are completely different.
Exactly. Agamemnon, the tragic hero, is acting within the accepted morality of his time. He's sacrificing for the greater good, for victory. It makes sense in that context.
Yeah.
But Abraham, he's a different story altogether.
So, Agamemnon is a hero in the traditional sense, but Abraham is responding to a direct command from God, even though it makes absolutely no logical sense.
There's no societal benefit, no rational explanation.
So is he a hero, a villain, or something else entirely?
Right, it's not so clear-cut. And that's where Kierkegaard introduces this concept of the knight of faith to describe someone like Abraham.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for us. What's a knight of faith?
It's the individual who acts purely on belief, even when it seems absurd, even when it defies all reason.
So they're willing to take a leap of faith into the complete unknown, trusting in something beyond human comprehension.
That's the idea. And this is where things get really interesting. Kierkegaard is exploring this idea that true faith often requires us to surrender our rational minds, our need for proof and logic.
You're saying we have to accept what seems paradoxical or even impossible?
It's a challenge, for sure. And let's not forget how Kierkegaard wrote Fear and Trembling. It's not your typical philosophical text. It's passionate, poetic, almost cryptic at times.
And then there's the whole pseudonym thing. He wrote under the name Johannes de Silentio, which adds another layer to all of this.
Right. It's like he's taking on this persona to grapple with these deeply personal and complex concepts, almost inviting us into this internal struggle between faith and reason.
He's not trying to hand us the answers on a silver platter.
Yeah.
He wants us to wrestle with these ideas alongside him, to confront the paradox, to embrace the uncertainty.
Absolutely. And he does this in part by outlining these stages a person might go through on their journey towards true belief, what he calls the movements of faith.
Okay, let's unpack these movements. What exactly is he talking about?
He starts with what he calls infinite resignation, this idea of fully accepting the loss of something incredibly precious to you.
Wow, that's heavy. So it's about confronting the absolute impossibility of your deepest desire.
Right, and finding a way to be okay with that loss.
It sounds almost like giving up, but I sense it's more than that.
It's an active choice, a conscious surrender.
And it's in that space of complete surrender, in that void, that authentic faith can emerge.
That's the idea. It's like hitting rock bottom, but instead of despair, you find a new path.
A path that leads to.
The second movement, the leap of faith.
Now we're getting to the good stuff. What does he mean by leap of faith?
It's that moment of radical belief, that surge of trust, that what seems impossible is actually possible.
Not because of logic or reason.
Right, but because of faith in something greater than ourselves.
Like Abraham saying, I'm going to go through with this, even though it makes absolutely no sense, because I have faith that God will make it right.
Exactly. He's defying logic, defying the ethical, and stepping into this realm of pure faith.
Wow, this is incredibly thought-provoking. But how does all of this apply to us, to our listeners out there, navigating the complexities of the 21st century?
That's where it gets really interesting. Kierkegaard was writing in the 19th century, but his insights into faith and the human condition are incredibly relevant today. He's forcing us to examine this relationship between the finite, our everyday lives, and the infinite, that realm of eternal truth.
So how do these two realms, the finite and the infinite, interact in your life? Have you ever faced a situation where your faith, your beliefs, clashed with what society or even your own logic was telling you? What happened? How did you reconcile those seemingly conflicting forces?
These are questions that I think we all grapple with, especially in a world that often feels increasingly secular and driven by data and reason.
So how do we reconcile these profound ideas about faith with the realities of a world that often values tangible proof over intangible belief? How do we make these seemingly abstract concepts concrete and relevant to our everyday lives?
That's the challenge that Kierkegaard lays before us. He's urging us to dig deeper, to question our assumptions, and to consider that maybe, just maybe, there's more to reality than meets the eye.
So are we all capable of being these knights of faith, or is this something reserved for, biblical figures and philosophers? And how do we even begin to apply these concepts to the very real challenges we face today?
Well, let's explore that further. Kierkegaard offers some really fascinating insights into those very questions. It's really interesting how Kierkegaard uses this story of Abraham to really challenge our whole understanding of what it means to be a hero.
Yeah, because usually when we think of heroes, it's those larger-than-life figures, conquering villains and saving the day, all
Exactly.
about outward actions, visible triumphs.
Right. But Abraham's heroism, if you can even call it that, is on a whole other level.
It's not about medals or recognition, is it?
No, not at all. It's not about external achievements or worldly recognition. It's about an internal struggle, this radical obedience to faith that defies all logic and seems to be leading to this terrifying outcome.
It's almost like he's an anti-hero,
Yeah.
right? Doing the opposite of what we'd expect, but Kierkegaard presents him as this ultimate example of faith.
Exactly. And that's what makes him such a difficult figure to really wrap your head around. We can't judge him based on our conventional standards of heroism or morality.
So how do we judge him?
We have to try to understand him through this lens of faith, through this seemingly absurd belief in something that seems impossible.
So are you saying that faith requires a kind of blindness, like a suspension of our critical thinking? How can we reconcile that with, the importance of reason and evidence in our lives?
That's a great question. And I think Kierkegaard would argue that it's not about abandoning reason altogether, but rather about recognizing its limits.
Okay, so there are limits to reason. What does that even mean?
It means acknowledging that there are realms of experience, realms of truth, that lie beyond what our rational minds can fully comprehend.
So there are things we can't explain, things that just defy our attempts to categorize and understand them through logic.
Exactly. And that's where faith comes in.
It's about taking that leap.
It's about taking that leap into the unknown, trusting in something that we can't fully grasp with our intellect.
But how do we know if we're taking a leap of faith or just, being foolish? How do we differentiate between genuine belief and just blind fanaticism?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Kierkegaard doesn't really give us a simple answer or a set of rules to follow.
So no easy answers from Kierkegaard, as usual.
No, he's constantly prodding us to examine our own beliefs, to question our assumptions, and to really wrestle with these complex questions ourselves.
He's more about helping us ask the right questions than providing the answers, isn't he?
Exactly. He's not giving us a roadmap.
He's giving us a compass.
Exactly. He's pointing us in a direction, but he leaves it up to us to navigate the terrain. And he does this by constantly contrasting faith with other human experiences,
Like what?
like aesthetics, ethics, and even the demonic.
Okay, break that down for us.
Okay, so aesthetics is all about beauty, pleasure, creating a sense of harmony and meaning in the world. Think about a great work of art or a beautiful piece of music. They evoke certain emotions, they create a sense of order and coherence.
I'm with you.
And in aesthetics, there's this emphasis on concealment and revelation. You see this in storytelling where the hero faces challenges and ultimately triumphs, revealing their true character along the way.
Right. And there's that satisfaction, a sense of completion that comes with those kinds of narratives.
Exactly. But Abraham's story doesn't fit that mold at all.
Yeah, his actions aren't exactly beautiful or harmonious, are they?
Not really. There's no guarantee of a happy ending, no sense of poetic justice. From an aesthetic perspective, sacrificing your son is this violation of our sense of beauty and order.
So it's like he's disrupting our expectations, our
Mhm.
desire for this neatly packaged narrative.
Exactly. And that's what makes his actions so perplexing. He's not motivated by aesthetics, by this desire for a satisfying resolution or a sense of beauty and harmony. He's motivated by something much deeper, something that transcends those earthly concerns.
He's operating on this level of pure faith that aesthetics can't fully grasp or explain.
Precisely. And then there's ethics, which is all about rules, doing what's right according to societal norms and moral codes.
And sacrificing your son is a pretty big violation of those codes.
To say the least, yes. And this is where he introduces that concept of the teleological suspension of the ethical, which essentially means that in certain cases, faith can override those conventional ethical obligations.
So he's suggesting that there might be situations where our faith, our relationship with God, takes precedence over our, societal or even personal moral codes.
Exactly. He's arguing that Abraham isn't breaking the rules out of some kind of malice or self-interest. He's acting on a higher calling, this divine command that transcends those earthly moral systems.
But that raises some questions, doesn't it? I mean, if faith can justify actions that we typically consider wrong, then where do we draw the line? How do we prevent this from becoming a license for fanaticism or cruelty?
That's a very valid concern, and I think Kierkegaard acknowledges the potential dangers of this concept. He's not suggesting that we should all go around suspending ethical norms whenever we feel like it.
So how do we navigate this tension between faith and ethics? How do we know when our faith is leading us towards a higher purpose and when it might be leading us astray?
That's where discernment comes in, I think. He's urging us to develop a deep and nuanced understanding of both our faith and our ethical responsibilities.
So it's a balancing act.
It is. It's about recognizing that these two realms can sometimes be in tension, and it's up to us to carefully consider the implications of our actions.
So it's not about blindly following our faith, but about engaging in this constant process of reflection, questioning, and seeking guidance.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Kierkegaard himself was deeply concerned with ethical issues. He wasn't advocating for this kind of reckless disregard for morality. He was trying to understand how faith could sometimes lead individuals to act in ways that seem to contradict conventional ethical standards.
So less about providing easy answers and more about acknowledging the complexity of these issues and encouraging a thoughtful, introspective approach to faith.
Precisely. And that's why he brings in the idea of the demonic. He uses this story of the merman, a mythical creature who falls in love with a human woman, to illustrate this point.
A merman and Abraham, how do those two connect?
Well, both the merman and Abraham are confronted with choices that seem to lead away from the ethical, from the accepted norms of their society.
Okay.
The merman can choose to deceive the woman he loves, to lure her into his world and ultimately destroy her. That's the demonic temptation, the allure of self-gratification over the well-being of another.
So it's a choice between selfishness and sacrifice, between indulging in our desires even if they harm others and choosing a path of selflessness and potentially painful consequences.
Exactly. But the merman also has the option to repent, to reveal his true nature and face the repercussions of his actions. He can choose a path of honesty and integrity even if it means suffering.
So where does Abraham fit into all of this?
Abraham also faces this incredibly difficult choice. He could disobey God, protect his son, and maintain his standing within his community.
And he doesn't.
He doesn't. He chooses this seemingly absurd path of faith, even though it appears to be leading to this horrific outcome.
So both the merman and Abraham are presented with these choices that defy conventional wisdom, that challenge their understanding of right and wrong.
Right. And both choose paths that involve a profound level of sacrifice and a willingness to face the unknown consequences of their actions. They're stepping outside of the familiar, the comfortable, and embracing the possibility of something greater, even if it comes at a great personal cost.
Okay, I'm starting to see how those stories connect now.
Yeah.
They both highlight this tension between personal desires and ethical obligations, and the role that faith can play in navigating those really difficult choices.
Exactly. And it's in that space, in that embrace of the seemingly absurd, that they transcend the limitations of human understanding and tap into something much greater than themselves.
This is incredibly rich material, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I agree. There's always more to discover with Kierkegaard.
But there's another layer to all of this that I want to explore a little bit. Kierkegaard himself was a complex figure, and, his personal struggles really seemed to seep into his writing.
Oh, absolutely.
Fear and Trembling isn't just an abstract philosophical treatise. It's this deeply personal work that reflects his own wrestling match with faith and doubt and the complexities of human existence.
I agree. You can really feel his presence in the text.
He wasn't just theorizing about these ideas, right? He was living them, grappling with them in a very real and visceral way.
For sure. And it's no secret that he had this tumultuous personal life. He was a bit of an outsider, someone who struggled with anxiety and oppression. And then there was his famous broken engagement to Regine Olsen, which seemed to really haunt him for years.
And you can really see echoes of those experiences, that sense of isolation and inner turmoil throughout Fear and Trembling.
Oh, absolutely.
He's using the story of Abraham and Isaac as this lens to explore his own doubts and anxieties about faith and love and the meaning of life.
Almost like a philosophical autobiography, masked in pseudonymity and biblical allegory.
I like that. It's like he's inviting us into his inner world, into his own search for meaning and understanding.
Exactly. And that's what makes his writing so compelling. It's not just about ideas, it's about a human being wrestling with those ideas, trying to make sense of them in the context of his own messy and complicated life.
And that's something that I think we can all relate to on some level, right?
I think so.
Whether we're struggling with faith or just trying to figure out our place in the world, Kierkegaard's writings offer this raw and honest glimpse into the human condition. He's not afraid to ask the tough questions, to challenge our assumptions, to push us beyond the limits of our own understanding.
And in that sense, he's not just a philosopher or a theologian. He's this fellow traveler, a companion on this journey of existential exploration.
Okay, so we've talked about the personal dimension of Kierkegaard's work, but let's zoom out a little bit and look at his social and historical context for a moment. He was writing in 19th century Denmark, a time and place that was, deeply steeped in Christian tradition. So what does he have to say about the state of faith in his own time? I know he's pretty critical of what he calls Christendom.
Oh, he's essentially calling out the hypocrisy of what he saw as this watered-down, complacent version of Christianity.
So he's not impressed with those who just go through the motions of religious observance without truly grappling with the deeper implications of their beliefs.
Not at all. He saw this kind of superficial faith as a form of despair, a way of avoiding the true challenge of confronting one's own existence before God.
So he's setting a pretty high bar, suggesting that true faith requires a level of commitment, a passion that goes beyond, simply attending church or reciting prayers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He believed that it was about wrestling with doubt, confronting the absurd, and taking that leap of faith into the unknown. He saw the knight of faith as this exception, a truly remarkable individual who embodied the true spirit of Christian belief.
And he seemed to believe that this kind of radical faith was pretty rare, even among those who considered themselves devout Christians.
He did. But I don't think he was being judgmental. I think he was trying to shake people out of their complacency, to challenge them, to examine their own beliefs and strive for this deeper, more authentic relationship with God.
Almost like a philosophical gadfly, right?
Yeah.
Poking and prodding at the status quo and urging people to wake up to the true meaning of faith.
I think that's a great way to put it. And what's fascinating? Kierkegaard's critique of Christendom still resonates today. We live in a world where religious belief is often seen as this outdated, irrelevant, or even dangerous thing.
But at the same time, there's still this deep human longing for something greater than ourselves, right? For meaning and purpose in a world that often feels pretty chaotic and meaningless.
Absolutely. And Kierkegaard's writings offer this powerful reminder that true faith is not about blind acceptance or following rules. It's about wrestling with doubt, confronting the absurd, and making that leap of faith into the unknown.
It's about embracing the paradox, accepting the limitations of our understanding, and trusting in something that transcends those limitations.
And that, listener, is a challenge that's as relevant today as it was in Kierkegaard's time.
It really strikes me how Kierkegaard emphasizes individual responsibility when it comes to faith. He's not giving us a set of doctrines to follow or some rigid system. It's like he's saying, figure it out yourself.
Yeah, he's definitely challenging each of us to make our own choices, to forge our own unique path to faith.
Right, like don't just blindly accept what you've been told. Think for yourself, wrestle with these ideas, and then make your own choice. And that's a powerful message, especially these days when we're bombarded with so much information, so many different perspectives.
It really is. It's about owning your faith, making it your own, rather than just adopting someone else's beliefs.
But how do we even begin to do that? How do we sort through all the noise and figure out what we truly believe?
Well, Kierkegaard would probably say it's not about achieving this kind of absolute certainty, It's more about embracing the paradox, accepting the limits of our understanding, and taking that leap of faith into the unknown.
Okay, so trusting in something beyond ourselves, something we can't fully grasp with our rational minds. But how do we reconcile that with our need for evidence, for proof in other areas of our lives?
That's the tension he's highlighting. And he uses this image of the knight of faith to illustrate this point.
The Knight of Faith.
Right. And remember, the knight of faith isn't someone who has all the answers, who's figured everything out. There's someone who's willing to live in that space of uncertainty, to embrace the paradox, and to act on their belief even when it seems completely absurd to everyone else.
So they're constantly walking this tightrope between faith and doubt, between the finite and the infinite. How do they even maintain their balance?
That's the challenge, right? And it's not an easy one. Kierkegaard sees the knight of faith as someone who's willing to embrace that tension, that struggle that's inherent in the human experience.
So it's not about having a comfortable, predictable faith.
No, not at all. They're willing to live in the messiness, the ambiguity, and trust that there's something greater at work, even in the midst of all the chaos.
It's a pretty daunting image, isn't it? It kind of makes you wonder if this whole Knight of Faith idea is just a theoretical concept, or if there are actually people like that out there living in the world today.
That's a great question, and I think Kierkegaard himself wrestled with that.
And he didn't try to romanticize it, did he?
No, he didn't pretend that it was easy or that it came without a cost.
Because there's a certain loneliness, a sense of isolation, that can come with holding such strong convictions, especially when those convictions go against the grain of what society considers acceptable or even rational.
Absolutely. The knight of faith is often misunderstood, even ridiculed by those who hasn't taken that same leap. And I think that's why he chose to write Fear and Trembling under that pseudonym Johannes de Silentio. It's like he was acknowledging that true faith can often be this silent, solitary struggle.
It's not something you can always articulate or explain to others, is it?
No, it's something you live, you embody, even if you can't always put it into words.
So are you saying that true faith is something that can't be shared or communicated? That it's this purely individual experience?
Not necessarily. I think Kierkegaard is suggesting that while the decision to embrace faith is ultimately a personal one, the experience of faith can actually connect us to something much larger than ourselves, something that transcends our individual differences. And even in the silence, even in the solitude, there can be this sense of shared struggle, a recognition that others have walked this path before us.
It's like he's creating this invisible community of faith,
Yeah.
bound not by shared doctrines or rituals, but by this common experience of wrestling with the big questions, of grappling with the mysteries of existence.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's a community that's open to anyone, regardless of their background or their beliefs. It's a community that welcomes doubt, that embraces the absurd, and that finds meaning in the very act of questioning, of searching, of taking that leap of faith.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Fear and Trembling, I want to leave our listeners with this final thought. Kierkegaard described Abraham as a knight of faith, someone who acted on belief even when it seemed impossible. Could there be modern-day knights of faith? Individuals who defy logic, who act on seemingly absurd beliefs that lead to extraordinary outcomes?
That's an interesting question. Maybe we all have the potential to be knights of faith in our own way. Maybe it's about finding that one thing, that one belief, that we're willing to cling to, even when the world tells us to let go.
And maybe it's about recognizing those individuals around us who embody that kind of radical faith, the ones who inspire us to question our assumptions and to consider the possibility of something beyond what we can see and understand.
Keep your eyes open out there. You might be surprised by who you find.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the ideas that challenge and inspire us. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep the faith.